Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Gavels and Gowns, a Williams Mullen education law podcast, where we explore topics that are important to leaders of institutions of primary, secondary, and higher education. I'm Hal Johnson, one of your co-hosts today, and I'm the chair of our education practice, and I work here in Richmond in our litigation section. I'm joined, as always, by Micah Schwartz, our co-host, who is a partner in our labor, employment, and immigration section, also does a lot of work with institutions of primary, secondary, and higher ed, and he's based in our Charlottesville office. Micah, how you doing?
Doing well, Hal. Good to be with you today. Also very happy to introduce our guest for today. Our guest is Scott Brabrand. Scott, you want to say hi?
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here.
How you doing, Scott?
Great,
Thanks.
Hal. Great, Micah. Thanks for having me here today. It's a real honor.
Thanks. It's good to have you. So I'll try to give you an introduction. You can add anything else that you think is appropriate. Scott is the executive director of the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, which is the school administrators association in Virginia. Prior to that, he was the superintendent in Fairfax County. And prior to that, he was the superintendent in the city of Lynchburg. Scott, is that a good description?
I'd say pretty good. And prior to that, I actually was in Fairfax County for about 18 years, and I started as a career switcher intern. So I was in telecommunications and actually got into education because of a business partnership where I got to go one day a week and serve in an English language classroom, and just fell in love with school and decided I need to become a teacher. So I started as an intern in Fairfax and got a chance to come back ultimately as superintendent. And I've loved all of my journey in Virginia, serving in both Fairfax and Lynchburg school divisions. And now I love supporting superintendents across the state. And I hope this podcast will be helpful to them and to anyone else who cares about higher education and K-12 education, more particularly here in the Commonwealth, and what's going on and where it's going.
Well, thanks for that, Scott. Since you went further back in time, I think we've concluded, tell me if this is right, that you were an assistant superintendent in Fairfax County, overseeing a few high schools, including West Potomac High School when I was there. Does that sound right?
Yes, I guess we have to say that that's the case. That's correct.
Sorry to
Like,
date.
is this leading up to a request from you to expunge your disciplinary record?
No comment.
That'll be handled in another legal podcast. How to expunge your records for current lawyers.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Scott. So to bring us on to our topic, we wanted to have you on our show today. We thought it'd be timely because the governor and General Assembly had just struck a deal on the budget. And I know that you follow dealings in Richmond and are particularly adept at explaining how budget deals affect K through 12 schools. So I was wondering if you could give us kind of an overview of what you understand to be in the budget and what the impact is on K through 12 schools.
Sure. I mean, this is a historic budget deal. I'm really excited after so many of the challenges to see the governor and the General Assembly come together. Historic investment, over $2 billion in K-12 education, and it's needed. The JLARC study came out last year and overwhelmingly said that Virginia has historically underfunded K-12 education in Virginia. So this budget is a real step in the right direction for public education. And here's several things that are in there that I think people will find interesting. First of all, $25 million to upgrade our SOLs, all of our assessments that kids are taking. The future is not going to simply be just a standardized test. It's going to be more performance enhanced. And I think you're going to see those tests begin to evolve to see more performance enhancements in the actual test items, and more adaptive questions where, depending on whether you get the question right or wrong, you get a different question. So I'm glad to see the assessments being updated. We're already updating math and language arts, English language arts, and math standards next year. So a lot is going on. In Virginia, we're implementing the science of reading as part of that English language arts standards update. So 2 of the 4 core subjects that we've been teaching forever, right? English, math, social studies, and science, 2 of the 4 new standards, and in English language arts, a new way of teaching it. So it's great to see the budget, one, giving 3% raises for all of our teachers. We're still not where we need to be, but we're going to get to that national average and get beyond it, hopefully soon. There's more money for school construction, both in school construction loans, about $200 million, and $80 million for school construction grants. That was one-time money before that the governor put out, and school divisions competed for that. You know, we have very old schools in Virginia, some that are 60, 70, 80 years old. They need an update. And so there's going to be money to do that. There's going to be money for mentoring elementary and secondary principals. We not only have a teacher shortage in Virginia and across the country, we really have a shortage of strong principals. And this mentoring program, I think, is going to go a long way to do that. In fact, we need mentoring, frankly, at every level, mentoring for teachers, mentoring for principals, and mentoring for superintendents, which is something we're actually doing now in the role I have supporting superintendents statewide. But it's good to see money for mentoring in there. There's going to be a statewide literacy screener, money to develop that screener so that as kids come in early elementary, to find out where they are in terms of their literacy level. So that's very helpful. There's going to be money devoted to telehealth. You know, mental health's a big issue with kids coming out of the pandemic and frankly just facing all that they face in the world and in social media. Many divisions can't afford mental health services, so telehealth is going to be something that the state's going to explore in greater detail. There's going to be money for the Dolly Parton Imagination Libraries. That's something that was started just a little bit ago, and the state is continuing to support and provide money for that. Money for communities and schools, which is sort of a wraparound service model that's going on in some school districts that really help counselors get to know kids and give them the wraparound services they need so that they are in a place to learn. If you're facing all these other basic social emotional issues, you're not going to be in a mindset to learn. And then finally, I would share that there's going to be the opportunity for some recovery schools. There's a recovery school in Chesterfield County being used by the greater RVA area, but they're going to add a recovery school in Virginia Beach and in Loudoun. These recovery schools are for kids that have faced different kinds of addiction. And we know the opioid epidemic has really impacted kids across the country. It's great to see these recovery schools that are going on around the country beginning to take root here in Virginia. So there's a lot of positive things going on in the budget. And I look forward to really working with the superintendents to make sure these dollars are, implemented for these programs very quickly as we start this next school year in the fall.
It certainly sounds like there is a lot packed into that budget, and thank you for that overview. Is there anything that the General Assembly accomplished through legislation outside of the budget that you think folks really ought to be aware of?
One thing that I think a lot of parents might be interested in, and really educators too, is they're going to fund a study around private day placement. These are often some of our special needs students that their needs can't be met within the school district. Well, the state is going to do a statewide data study. How are kids doing in those private day placements? There's been a lot of discussion about kids in special education getting the services they need. How is the private day system responding to kids' needs? How successful is it? How much does it cost? I think there's sometimes been a lot of contention around the issue of additional services for kids. And I think this study is going to be a step for us to build collective awareness to really understand the scope of private day placement and how well it's working, and how can schools better support that handoff when, hey, schools have done everything they can and the child needs a private day placement. So that's a study that I think is something not necessarily immediately budget related, but is going to give us some information that I think could be helpful to parents, to students, and to educators as well.
Thanks, Scott. We were talking before we started recording today about cell phones. And I'm wondering if, first of all, has the General Assembly issued any kinds of rules about cell phones in schools? And if not, do you expect that they will? And has your association made any kind of position on that topic?
Yeah, I have not seen anything statewide, but what's really happening is organically, this issue of responsible cell phone use within the context of a school is coming up in terms of really restrictions to cell phones. Now, obviously, cell phones, when they first coming out in the aftermath of Columbine, were really seen as a school security issue, a way to communicate with your kid in an emergency. And almost every school still understands that that's a function and there's a place for that. But the day-to-day proliferation of cell phones and social media have found really that kids are becoming more and more distracted from the core mission of schools, which is to do teaching and learning and have an environment conducive for that. So I think we're actually hearing from kids, from parents, from teachers, we need to take back our classrooms. Yes, there are tools to use computers and use technology, but cell phones were becoming really an addiction within the classroom. And I think breaking that cycle of addiction is what is happening now. Different school boards, frankly, are all coming up with new ways to still have access either before or after the school day to a cell phone, but certainly ways to really restrict the cell phone use during the day. And I'm not sure a statewide law is going to be needed, because I almost think the majority of districts are really having that debate, and it's probably one that's best done locally, given the history, of course, of local control for schools and school boards in this Commonwealth and across the country.
Thanks for that, Scott. One more question for me. Then you were just saying that you think this is an issue that will be taken care of locally. I wanted to pan out for a minute nationally. We've been focusing on kind of state politics and things that have happened in the General Assembly over the last couple of months. Is there anything at the national level, I'm thinking maybe Title IX, that you think would be worth our listeners hearing about?
Two things to say real quick. First, while we're still on cell phones nationally, the Senate unveiled a AI plan around how to really harness AI. I think we're going to have to figure out nationally and across Virginia how we're going to use or not use AI in our classrooms. And I don't think we're going to be able to ban AI. It's filtering into more and more of our everyday technologies that we already use. But we are going to have to figure out how to use it responsibly, and to be able to be sure that we're creating assessments of kids that accurately reflect their knowledge and skills, not that of an AI device or an AI software. So the Senate's got some new legislation out. I haven't read all of it yet, but we've got to catch up and really harness AI and not just have a free-for-all, because I think its impact on our kids could be even more negative than some of the issues we've dealt with cell phones. As far as Title IX, Title IX really, I think, first of all, Title IX in sports has been punted to after the presidential election. This issue about kids, who they play in sports, can transgender kids play? That's going to, I think, be an issue, but I think it's going to be an issue that resolves itself after the next election. As you know, the VHSL has had a transgender rule in place for probably 20 years, and it seems to have served Virginia well, but we'll have to see what happens with those national Title IX regulations on athletics after the election. Title IX before the election, and what's actually going to be implemented this year, is really looking at the issue of harassment, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, a hostile work environment, and is going to really, I think, give schools, as they already have been, putting a focus on making sure kids are safe in their schools and free from bullying and harassment. They're going to have to make some adjustments. It's going to become, I think, more imperative that they're aware of what harassment is in schools and that they're doing something about it. But it's also going to become less like a judicial proceeding and more back to using school disciplinary tools and school interventions, including behavioral interventions and support groups, to address issues of bullying and improper behavior by kids. So these Title IX regs should be out in the beginning of August, and we're going to actually work with you and your team to help make sure our superintendents understand exactly what the Title IX regulations are calling for, so that they can be properly implemented this year.
Yeah, I appreciate you noting that, Scott. As Scott said, I think you described it very well. The regulations are going to allow schools to handle things less like a trial and more like what they know, which is disciplinary proceedings. So
correct.
Especially in the K-12 space, I think it's a return to something that's more familiar. But you and I will be talking more about that in another podcast, a webinar. You and I are going to in a couple of weeks. So I think that's probably a good time to wrap up this one. Al, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, sure. And Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have a guest on who knows what they're talking about. And that's why we refer to some of these subject matter experts. But we've enjoyed speaking with you. We'd love to get you back on sometime. And for our audience out there, if you have any questions, or certainly if you have suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear them. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You may also visit our education page at williamsmullen.com. There you can find out more about our education team and the types of legal services we provide both inside and outside the education industry. And finally, be sure to subscribe to this podcast series to be notified when our next episode posts. Thank you so much for tuning in.